While you're enjoying your dessert this evening, we have a guest speaker that I am absolutely convinced will entertain and educate you. Freddi Dogterom is a professional speaker. She's also a corporate trainer and facilitator. She is a fantastic storyteller, and surprisingly, you add this to her resume, a retirement planner, and she's also an award-winning Toastmaster. She's been recognized as a top 10 trainer across Canada, and her talents and tales are very much in demand at corporate events. Over the past 25 years, she's led workshops and delivered keynote addresses for clients large and small. She has a really interesting background, and I expect that we're going to hear a number of stories from that background tonight. Most of you would expect, given that we're at a Chamber of Commerce function, that she is a successful business owner, which would only be appropriate. Here's a little twist. She's served as a recruiter in the Beaufort Sea oil patch. We're close to Calgary, we get the oil patch thing. But this is something you might find fascinating, and I hope she tells a story about it. She was actually one of the first female ice road truckers. She has sold goldfish above the Arctic Circle. Another story that I hope she tells us later. And she has obviously a very wide range of interests. This evening's presentation is going to be about sharing some of her life and business lessons. And she wants you to sit back and relax while she talks about what like tire tracks on the tundra is about. Ladies and gentlemen, Freddi Dogterom.
Thanks. Can you move this? Just a little bit of housekeeping here. How many of you have been in northern Canada? Okay, now I can't see you, so we're going to have to do the woohoo thing. Okay, so how many people have been to Edmonton? Right on. You know, sometimes when I'm talking across Canada, they think northern Canada is Edmonton. How many have been to Fort McMurray? Right on. How many have been to Yellowknife? You know, I used to fly 4 hours straight south just to get to Yellowknife. In fact, I used to fly to Yellowknife just to get Chinese food. You see, I was based in Inuvik, Northwest Territories, and it was a phenomenal place. Now, how many people have been to Inuvik? Yes! All right, how about Tuktoyaktuk? Whoa, we're getting a little shallow here in the pool of experience. Paulatuk. Sax Harbor. Aha, I knew I would find my uniqueness in this group. So having the opportunity to work and live and be in the Arctic was absolutely phenomenal. And tonight I'm going to, as Cheryl said, talk a little bit about some of my experiences, and I've entitled this presentation like Tire Tracks on the Tundra. You know, the tundra is an amazing place. It is like the prairies because it goes on and on and on forever, but it's magical. The tundra is fragile. It is delicate. It is beautiful, and it has its own essence at each time of the year. You see, where I lived, if you can see the little red star up at the top, that's where I lived, and if you see the little red star right at the bottom, that's where we are tonight. 4,800 miles, or 7,742.6 kilometers, we want to be precise, straight south. Absolutely amazing. So what is great about the tundra? Well, absolutely everything, and here's the cool thing. When I was working as an oil field recruiter, I got to go to work in little airplanes and helicopters. Like, how cool is that? And I got to fly over the tundra, and you know what's interesting? Is that you could see every mark. You could see where a game trail was. You could see a path where the people had gone. And you could see where somebody had taken a quad or a nodwell and gone across the tundra. You see, every mark was there forever. very much like us in business. In business, everything we do leaves a mark. And it's just like those tire tracks on the tundra, our marks remain forever. This particular map shows the area that I worked in. It was from Inuvik North. And it was really a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I got to see some really interesting things. Those of you that have been to Tuktoyaktuk, you will remember the pingos. Pingos are awesome. They're like, I don't know, planetary zits. They're, yeah, they're huge. They're great big frost heaves. And that's what they look like. Just in the middle of nowhere, all of a sudden, boom, there's this big frost heave. And some of the communities use them as their community ice house, their storage center. Now, I had the opportunity one time in a small community to go and take a look at what was going on in their ice house, in their pingo. Never do that again. They stored amazing things in there. And in a land where food is often in scarce supply, you'd be amazed at what they stored in their pingo. It was a one-time event. If you're invited, don't go into a pingo. But I also got the opportunity as a truck driver, and yes, I was one of Canada's first female ice road truckers. How many of you have seen that show on TV? Woohoo! All right. You know, a friend of mine was in Nicaragua this spring, and his taxi driver didn't say much in English, but he said, "Oh, Canada, ice road trucker." Who knew? You see, 35 years ago when I was an ice road trucker, it was just a job. If I'd have known it was going to be on TV, I might have been better at it. But as it was a job that I enjoyed very much. Now, this evening's presentation, we are not going to talk about the ice road, but there is a presentation where I do talk about it. The tundra in the summertime is absolutely stunningly beautiful. And it covers some of the marks. Just like in business, sometimes we can cover some of the marks, but you know, those tire tracks are still there. So when I was in Inuvik, it wasn't unusual to see this kind of a scene. You'd see a polar bear, you know, parked in somebody's backyard just waiting to become a coat or a rug or something. And I was really quite surprised when I first moved there because, I don't know, I live in West Lethbridge, and I look around my neighborhood, there's not a lot of polar bears stretched out to dry in West Lethbridge. Have you noticed? But this is what was happening quite regularly. Well, one of the things I did is that I had a business. I had a pet store. 400 miles north of the Arctic Circle, I owned a pet store, and I sold cool stuff. I sold gerbils and little fluffy rabbits and all sorts of pet store things. Now, up in the high Arctic, they do not have reptiles. And so I brought in a couple of garter snakes. Now, I'm like a lot of ladies, I don't like garter snakes, but it was so cool. It was marketing, right? It's business. And so I brought in a couple of garter snakes. Well, you can imagine that when the garter snakes came into my pet store, they came in a gunny sack. Now, the interesting thing about snakes is that, you know, they have to have sort of an ambient temperature that is appropriate before they can move. Well, I opened my bag of snakes, and I tipped them out onto the counter, and they went clunk. And I thought to myself, what do you call a snake in the Arctic? A stick. And so I'm thinking, oh man, I got defective snakes. I don't know, have you ever had defective product come into your business? I had defective snakes. And so I left them laying there on the counter. They warmed up. And the next thing I knew, the counter was bare. I'm sitting there going like, this is a problem because my landlord had said absolutely definitively no snakes in your pet store. And so I'm going like, here, snake, 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 here, snake, snake, snake. So I found one squiggling across the floor, and I'm going like, oh, now I have to touch it, which I did. I picked it up, put it in his enclosure. And then the other one, snake number 2. Couldn't find snake number 2 anywhere. And so what I did is that I started going through all of the shelves. Have you ever had lost merchandise? I found it curled up in the dog chews, and so the little rawhide chews, so I put snake number 2 back. Well, you would think that as a business in the Arctic, you have enough problems with the snakes. But my territory, as you saw in the earlier map, was like 300,000 square miles of absolutely nothing. And my customers were in the camps and the small communities above the Arctic Circle. And they would phone and they would say, you know, send me a budgie, send me a parrot, send me this, send me that. The most popular thing was tropical fish. Everybody in the Arctic loved to have an aquarium. And so my challenge was, how do I get my product to the consumer in good shape? Now imagine if you had product that was live, and it was delicate, and it was already traumatized because it had been shipped from Singapore or Florida or Montreal. And now you have to take your tropical fish and send them by small aircraft to a community. I know I am here with some of the most brilliant business minds in southern Alberta. I killed a lot of fish. I did everything right. I took the box, the styrofoam, the pink insulation, the little bag, handed it to the pilot in the single otter. He'd fly off and the customer would say, hey, my fish arrived dead. So I've got to ask you, how would you solve that problem? If you had to ship live fish at 48 below, 700 miles, how would you do it? How would you do it? Yes, an airplane is part of the solution. Hand delivering the package to the pilot who then hand delivers it to a customer is part of the solution. A heater? No, no plug-ins on an airplane. It was my 7-year-old son at breakfast one morning. He says, hey, Mom. He says, why don't you stick them in a thermos? Who knew? You know, you can get business advice and information and solutions from the most unusual sources. And so that's what I did. I started using thermoses. Now, of course, that was built into the price of a fish. So people didn't order just one. I mean, who's going to buy one $32 goldfish? I mean, really. So they would order multiples. And so I was very, very successful as a tropical fish distributor in the Arctic once I found that thermoses are the perfect way to transport fish. Well, in addition to selling fish, I was working with an absolutely remarkable gentleman by the name of Rudy. Rudy was an Inuit fellow, and he was, without a doubt, unequivocally the very best leader I have ever had the privilege of serving under. He was an interesting fellow. He'd been born out on the land, which meant that he was born in either a tent or an igloo out on the land, because there aren't a lot of communities up in the Arctic. And so Rudy was born out on the land, and everything that he knew came from his dad and the elders and the people in his small family grouping. Now, what made Rudy really remarkable as a leader is that he would come and tell us bush lessons. And he'd come and say things that, such as, you know, Freddi, watch yourself in the willow. It's going to slap you in the eye. And you're going, what the heck are you talking about, Rudy? And he would come up with a really, really brilliant analogy and life lesson. So this evening, I'm going to share with you 3 of Rudy's life lessons. So let's take a look at the lessons. Rudy's bush lessons is, first of all, keep your eyes on the path, but always watch the horizon. We're going to unpack that. Number 2, know your channel. Very, very important in the Mackenzie Delta. And number 3, yes, we'll talk about it, don't eat your last dog. And you're going like, ooh, no, there's a real good lesson with it. So keep your eye on the path, but watch the horizon. You see, Rudy was big about developing people. And just to yourself, I want you to think on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being, I can't believe how bad I am at it. And 10 being, oh, I am the best on the planet. Okay? So between 1 and 10, for you, personally or within your organization, where would you put yourself on personal or staff development? On a scale of 1 to 10. You know, when I talk to corporations around Canada, a lot of people are sort of in that 3 to 5 zone. So then ask yourself, what would it take to move from a 3 to 5 up to maybe a 7, 8, or 9? What would it take for you in your organization to move from that 3, 4 to a 7, 8, 9? If you do the math and you think on an average small organization may have 10 employees, and because I'm not the finance person, I do people, I don't do numbers. If you think if you've got 10 staff members at an average of $50,000 a year, and I'm using $50,000 because I really don't do numbers, that's $500,000. That's $500,000 investment that you got right there in people. What are you doing to grow them? You see, if you keep your eye on the path, this is where you, your business, and your people have to go. But you have to look at the horizon. Now, one of the things I do is I do a lot of career development planning with folks, and I've always believed that you need to have a rolling 10-year plan. You have a business plan for your business. Do you have a rolling 10-year career plan for yourself and your business? It's great to be in Alberta because in Alberta, we have the Canada-Alberta Jobs Grant. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but this is an amazing grant that's completely underutilized where you can offset 2/3 of your training costs. You know what I hear from people? I can't really afford to train my people, and if I train them, they'll leave. So what if they do? Get more. Here's my answer. What if you don't train them and they stay? Just asking. Now, is training expensive? Certainly. You know, there's more than just the training cost. But through something like the Canada-Alberta Jobs Grant, if you can defer 2/3 of the cost, why wouldn't you be keeping your eye on the horizon? If you want more information about it, you can Google it. You can talk to Teamwork Training Institute. They're doing Canadian Job Grant. You can talk to Lethbridge College, University of Lethbridge, or myself. I'm working with people all across Alberta as well as the other provinces, helping them put together plans so that they can grow their people, so they've got their eye on the path, and they're able to look ahead to the horizon. You know, one of the challenges that we had when I was doing recruiting is that I was going out into the communities and the small camps, which is really cool. And I was talking to people that may or may not have any kind of formal education. We were putting them to work in the marine drilling environment, a very, very dangerous environment. At that time, it was lower tech than it is today, but we still had to train, educate, and advance them. So just think about yourselves. If you're keeping your eye on the path, but you're focused on your horizon, what is the Bush lesson for you? Invest in your people. Grow yourself. Here's the interesting thing that I've learned, is that if you as a leader are changing and growing and developing, your people are going to come right along behind you. So that's Bush lesson number 1. Bush lesson number 2, know your channel. Rudy was always out hunting in the Mackenzie Delta, and this is a picture of the Mackenzie Delta. It's very complex, very, very confused. There's waterways, there's little lakes, there's numerous chances of getting lost. And so when he came in and says, you know, we have to know our channel. We sort of did the Scooby-Doo, sort of the, you know, like, what are you talking about now, Rudy? And he says, no, he says, we have to know where it is we're going. Now, can there be more than one route? Absolutely. So one of the really cool things that we did, working with these individuals that were going to be working in the modern oil patch, was that we developed a technical school. We called it Tuk Tech. It was in Tuktoyaktuk. It was at the Dome Oil base camp. How many people here remember Dome Oil? Yeah, I lost a lot of money too. But we used their base camp in the off season to set up a technical school. You see, at that time, in order to get a drill lease, you had to have 60% of your workforce as Indigenous to the Northwest Territories. And so I would go out and I'd recruit and I'd bring these folks in. I had some marvelous opportunities to go to like little fish camps and the goose camp and the whale camp and meet with people. And the young folks would then come and we'd bring them into Tuktoyaktuk and we would put them in technical school. And it was really quite interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, they may or may not have any kind of formal education. A lot of them had. In fact, my boss, Rudy, had been to residential school, and with all due respect to folks that had a different experience, Rudy loved it. He said that was the only way he was able to get an education. And so some of these other people that we were bringing into Tuktek had been at residential school, and they might have got to grade 7, grade 8-ish. And so now we're bringing them into a technical environment where they're working in a very dangerous place on a marine drilling operation out in the Beaufort Sea. Oil drilling is dangerous on land. But when you add that element of having it out in the ocean, either on a man-made island or out on a drill ship, it just puts that much more danger factor involved. And so with Tuktek, we were also dealing with the safety, as well as literacy, as well as, oh my gosh, I'm away from home. But we also had to be hypersensitive to their culture. And you see, as we move into more and more of a cross-cultural work environment, whether we're in southern Alberta or northern Canada, we have to think about culture. One of my roles was to educate the oil companies because culturally, with the Inuit people, they were the subsistence hunters, and especially when they lived out on the land. And so when the spring came and the river broke up, it was rat season. And they would go out in the delta and they would hunt muskrat. And that became their meal. You know, being a woman and traveling around the Arctic as I did was really quite interesting because I would travel fully clothed with several layers of clothing in my Woods 4-star sleeping bag, and they didn't have hotels and motels. In fact, the Beaufort Inn in Tuktoyaktuk was an ATCO trailer. And what you rented was not a room, you rented a bunk, a steel Army surplus bunk. And so I would show up with my Woods 4-star and I'd flop open my sleeping bag and I rented my bunk. And it was kind of interesting because I was the only woman for thousands of square miles doing this kind of work, and I had some interesting roommates from time to time. And I got to the point where I started to carry a sign that said Bob, and it was babe on board, which means that, you know, gentlemen, there's somebody of the other gender in your room. And so traveling and working like that, sometimes I was sleeping on the floor of the chief's house, or I could be sleeping on a corner of the lodge, you know, where the elders met. I just never knew where I was going to be, but it was very, very cool. And they would invite me to dine with them. Now, some of the northern delicacies, now we've just had dinner, we're not going to get into northern delicacies in a big way, but in rat season, for example, you would be invited, and there would be a cast iron frying pan with about 2 inches of lard in it, with this wonderful little fresh caught, not clean skinned, nothing, muskrat just sort of laying in the frying pan, looking at you, not blinking. That was dinner. We have to be culturally sensitive and aware. You see, another season that they had was goose season. And when it was goose season, everything stopped for 4 weeks because they would go off and they would hunt goose because that was going to be their meal for the winter. And they would put the geese in their pingo. And then came whale season. Seal and whale season came along in the fall just before freeze-up. There is nothing on the planet more disgusting than muktuk. Now, by a big woohoo, has anybody besides me tried muktuk? Is it disgusting? Yes. This is frozen fat. Whale fat. Fishy frozen whale fat that is served to you in a little cube and you put your teeth into it, and then you use your knife and you slice it off, and you hope you don't lose your lips or your nose. Disgusting. I had to become a vegetarian. Wasn't my fault, couldn't help it. But you have to be culturally sensitive. And so folks would have to have their seasons, just like we do today. So you see, we had to know what channel we were in. Was it easy to get lost? Sure. Did we make mistakes? Absolutely. We had some colossal failures. I can remember one particular year where the oil company that was sponsoring the training was absolutely not allowing anybody out of training for more than a 2-week block. Well, you know, when your season's 4 weeks, 2 weeks doesn't cut it. And so 100% of our trainees went back to their communities to hunt, to gather, to feed their families. 100% of our trainees did not return. Lesson learned. We have to be culturally sensitive. So what are some ways that we can develop and help our people that are going to be good for the individual as well as the business? Well, one of the best international, inexpensive, readily available courses of training is Toastmasters. Anybody heard of Toastmasters? Oh, man, it is amazing. For under $150 a year. Now, can you personally, or can you afford this for your employees? Can you afford $150 a year to turn them into leaders, to turn them into great communicators? Probably. Last month, I was down in Las Vegas, and I was speaking at Caesar's Palace to the International Toastmasters Convention. There was 2,500 people from 135 countries around the world. It was amazing. These people were the business leaders in their countries. And they said, you know what, Toastmasters is making a difference. Because people think Toastmasters, well, it's all about talking. Nope. It is about talking, but it's also about communicating. It's also impromptu speaking. And they have a dynamite leadership program. I believe that leadership is who we are. It comes from our heart. It's what we do. Leadership is not on the org chart. That's a manager, that's a director, whatever, that's a title. Leadership is an attitude, it's a heart. You know, in Lethbridge, we've got 5 different Toastmasters clubs, and to my knowledge, when I checked earlier this week, there's 8 businesses in Lethbridge that insist on all of their employees going to Toastmasters. Interesting. Is this something that could help your people develop? I mean, literally for less than $150 a year, could you invest that in your people? Could they invest it in themselves and you just give them the time to go to the meetings? Here's an interesting thing. I was talking to a gentleman from Australia, and in their club, it was a corporate club. And so you don't have to send your people anywhere. Start your own darn club. There's Toastmasters everywhere that'll help you with that. But they started their own club. They saw their bottom line when they worked with their people to become communicators and leaders. Within 1 year, their bottom line went up 37%. I don't know a lot of businesses that wouldn't like to grow even a fraction of that much. So, you know, there's just a thought, there's an idea. If you want information about Toastmasters, I'm happy to tell you, but you got to know your channel. Where is it that you want your business to go? And if you're not growing your people, how can you grow your business? Let's take a look at Bush lesson number 3. This was one of my favorites. Rudy came in one day and he sat down at the meeting and he says, okay, people, today's Bush lesson, don't eat your last dog. I'm going, what? Seriously? Well, you know, here's what's interesting. At the time that I was in the Arctic, it was right at that change point between tradition and technology. Some of the fellows had gone to these new snow machines, and some folks were still out on the land hunting with dogs. And I talked to an elder one time and I said, so, you know, what technology are you using? And he says, well, I still have my dog team, but my son has a snow machine. I said, oh yeah. He says, with the snow machine, you can go further, and you can go faster, and you can get into trouble way deeper. And when the storm comes up, and they come up very, very quickly, when the storm comes up, he says, the snow machine will not bring you home. He says, but with my dogs, he says, maybe I don't go as far, maybe I don't go as fast, but if the storm comes up, he says, my dogs will look after me. Because if I have to, they can become a food source. He says, but you never eat your last dog because that's the dog that'll bring you home. So how do we take something like that and now turn it into a business lesson? Don't eat your last dog. What are you doing with the experienced people at your workplace? There are companies that will say, oh my gosh, you've turned 65, we're going to kick your butt to the curb, give us your clients, and get out. That happens. Not just in Lethbridge, it happens across Canada. I'm a retirement planner. I talk to people and companies about that. 10 years out. 10 years out is when you need to start talking to your folks. Because you cannot afford as a business person, whether you're a large or small company, to have all of your institutional knowledge walking out the door. Now, what about taking your senior people and turning them into mentors? Now, is everybody a natural mentor? No. You know, we really like to hang on to what we know. You know, like, I know this, these are my clients, these are my customers, whatever. People love to hang on to their stuff. But, you know, handled well and respectfully and honoring the knowledge and the contribution that these senior people have made to your organization, you can then take and harvest the bounty of their years of experience, and you can invest it in some of your junior people. Why isn't it happening more? The interesting thing in Alberta is that demographically, we're one of the youngest provinces. In some of the other provinces, they're doing a much better job because, quite frankly, everybody's older. And so they're doing this transition more. But think about how you can take your institutional knowledge, these people that have been around, maybe they started with you, maybe they helped your business grow. Maybe they came in as a second career and they brought experience from another arena into your business. How can you take that and now use this as a resource to grow your business, to grow some of your other people? Now, are there mentorship programs around? Absolutely there are. Now, with the Canada-Alberta Jobs Grant, one of the ways that you can utilize this is by doing mentorship training, teaching your people how to be mentors. It's a skill. It's like anything else. You know, you learn to drive a car, sure, learn to be a mentor. And as long as it's a minimum of 25 hours, possibly, it could be accepted. Another thing you can do, yes, Toastmasters. Toastmasters is a fabulous mentorship program for $150 a year. You too could turn your people into fabulous mentors. So you see, there's lots and lots of avenues out there for you as business people, for you as employees. Don't wait for your boss. You know, quite honestly, if you wait for your boss to put together a training program for you, you're going to dry up and blow away. That's just not going to happen. But own it yourself. You see, pick your own channel. Figure out what is it that you want to be when you grow up. What is it that you want to do within the business? Put together a proposal and take it to your boss. Don't wait for the willow to slap you in the eye. And whatever you do, business owners, don't eat your last dog. Because when that last piece of knowledge walks out the door, that could be a very, very difficult, a start of a very difficult part for you. So this is just some of the fun that we had working in the Arctic with my buddy Rudy, and he would come with these bush lessons. You know what's cool about bush lessons? It's like some of the lessons that you share with your people. They've stayed with me for 35 years. In fact, I was talking to Rudy last week, and I said, hey, I'm going to share some of your bush lessons with the Chamber of Commerce. He goes, Freddi, I can't believe that you still remember them. I says, oh yeah. I says, they were so weird that they stuck with me, especially that dog one, like don't eat your last dog. I mean, that stuck with me forever. So meanwhile, back at the pet store, back at my business, I had solved the problem of shipping live tropical fish around the Arctic. But I had one more problem that I still needed to solve. You see, when my stock came in, because it was flown in, I had to go out and meet at the airport, at the freight shed, and one of the agents there had to be with me when we opened the lid to make sure that everything was alive, because they were insured shipments. And I'm sure that some of you that handle delicate goods or, fragile things understand what I'm talking about. Well, the first time a shipment of fish came in, I rushed out to the airport. I thought, this is great. So here's what's cool about sending pets up to the Arctic. They traveled in the compartment with the passengers. And so there'd be, birds sitting on the front seat singing, la, 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 la. And the aircraft was configured for freight in the front, and there's about 20 seats in the back for humans and birds and bunnies and gerbils, etc. And so the fish came in a container, much like you're seeing on the screen. It was a styrofoam container, and they were in bags, just like you would go down to Petland here or wherever in Lethbridge and buy tropical fish. Now, they were coming in from Singapore, they were coming in from Florida, some of them were even coming in from as close as Edmonton, which is only a 6-hour flight. And so I go out to the freight shed, and with great anticipation, we'd take the X-Acto knife and we'd open the top and we'd flip it open and we'd take a look at the fish. Now, I remember the very first cargo, the very first box that I looked at. Have you ever seen those fish? They're called celestial goldfish. They got sort of the pouchy things under their eyes, and their eyes look up to heaven. They were raised by the Tibetan monks. They're called celestial goldfish. And so all I could see was this bunch of little eyeballs looking at me. And I'm going like, oh, wow, they're alive. But you know what happened? They took one look at me, and they went, ah, and they rolled over, and they died. And I slammed the lid. I went, oh, my gosh. What's happened? And so I peeked the lid open a little further, and I looked at the next bag. Well, these fish, they looked back at me. They took one look, and they went, ah, and they rolled over dead too. I shut the lid. Oh my goodness sakes, what's going on here? I don't know if you've ever, killed your your products. I was certainly on a roll that day. And so the next time I peeked the lid open much more slowly. And I took a look at the third bag. And they took a look, and they just went, ah, and they only rolled on their side. And I thought, this is a good thing. They're getting used to me. So here's what was happening, unbeknownst to me, that when fish are in distress, and shipping thousands of miles apparently causes them distress, that if you introduce light very suddenly, it shocks them and kills them. And so here I was, peeking in, all excited, merrily killing my fish. So what can we learn from things like that? Well, one of the things that I learned is that, patience is a virtue. The next time I got fish, I slid it open, and I opened it just a little bit. And then a little bit more. It was more of an incremental change for them, rather than having them change all at once. I only lost half the fish that shipment. And I got better and better at it. But here's what I'm wondering. With our employees, with our staff, with the people we work with our customers, with our service providers, how often do we take the light and just shine it in their eyes? And we're shocking them, possibly killing them, metaphorically, of course. So do we take our light, our business, our idea, our enthusiasm, and do we take it and use it as a flashlight in their eyes? Or do we take it and use it to light the path for them? So that rather than blinding them, what we can do is help them to grow and develop. You see, everything that we do in business, whether it's dealing with our fish, customers, clients, whatever, everything we do is like the tire tracks on the tundra, because everything we do has a permanent effect. So our bush lessons, number one, keep your eyes on the path, but also watch the horizon. Where am I going today? Where do I need to go tomorrow? Do you have a rolling 5 to 10 year career plan? What are you going to do today to prepare your employees, your human resource, for the future? How can you build them? How can you make them ready for that horizon? Know your channel. Do you know where you are? Do you have a clearly articulated goal as to where you are today? And what about your mature workers? What about your senior staff? You know what's magical? I do retirement planning, and people come up to me and they're going like, oh my God, Freddi, I'm turning 55 and I have to retire. And I go, why? Well, because other people expect it of me. No. You know what? Ride your own horse. March to your own drummer. As a business person, don't eat your last dog, because you need to have that knowledge. So, business people of Lethbridge, it has been my pleasure, my joy, and my delight to share with you some of Rudy's bush lessons. And I would just like you to think about, take with you, and remember that your business, you as individuals, are making a mark. Everything you say, everything you do, being part of the chamber, being out in the community, you're leaving a mark everywhere, just like those magical tire tracks on the tundra. Thank you.